Hi, welcome back. In this lecture, we're going to look at the proper construction of the Uniform Commercial Code Article 2, which is to say when a court is faced with a question of how to interpret UCC Article 2, they can rely on certain foundational principles. And these foundational principles, there's 5 of them. And these principles are what the law of sales rests on. And so it's important for you to know these because this will assist you when you are approaching a uniform commercial code problem. In your writing assignment, you're going to face a problem arising out of the UCC, and it may not be clear cut. And so you will have to rely on these foundational principles to help you figure out how to handle that. The foundational principles help those engaged in commercial transactions to follow both the law and the spirit of the law. So in this lecture, we're going to look at the foundational principles of the Uniform Commercial Code. Now, principle number 1, the Article 2 is tied to its commercial setting. The drafters of the Uniform Commercial Code were legal realists. And you might remember this from your 3213 course, your introductory business law course. This legal realism is a philosophy that says the law should reflect what society already does. And the drafters of the UCC wanted to codify pre-existing conduct. How were people engaged in sales transactions before the statute was created? And so the statute aims to honor what people's expectations are. And if there's ever a question that arises in a gap or a gray area in the statute, what you should do is ask the following question. How would similarly situated parties have resolved this matter if they had bargained over it? So keep that idea in mind when you come to solve a UCC Article 2 problem, and in this case, the contract is going to be silent as to one particular issue. So what you should do is think about what would the parties have bargained for had they thought of it. How do we fill in this gap? Now, the second foundational principle is that merchants are held to a higher standard. Article 2 applies higher standards to merchants over non-merchants. Now, Article 2 does apply to both commercial and consumer transactions, meaning whether you are purchasing a product for resale in your business or you're purchasing a product for your personal, family, or household use. And Article 2 applies to both merchants and non-merchants. Now, merchants have expertise with respect to the goods in question. And the UCC presumes that merchants should know better. And again, this is an important foundational principle to keep in mind when confronting a UCC problem. Keep that idea that merchants should know better. The third principle has to do with the formation of a contract. And in this third principle, we rely on what's called the unconscionability doctrine. And this applies to the formation stage of an Article 2 contract. Now, allegations of abuse by one party during contract formation are usually governed by the law of unconscionability. Now, sometimes a party will argue that they were forced to agree to an unfair contract, which is to say that they signed the contract only because they were somehow forced into it, either with a direct threat of violence or more likely a threat of economic coercion. The unconscionability doctrine allows a court to refuse to enforce a contract if it finds unconscionable behavior. Say that, Domino's Pizza had an exclusive contract with one cheese provider. And a week before the Super Bowl, the cheese supplier notifies Domino's Pizza that they are going to be increasing the cost of their cheese by 3 times. Now, what is Domino's Pizza going to do? Are they going to blow off the Super Bowl? Are they going to have a week to go find another supplier? Probably they're going to pay the increased amount. But this raises the question of, is it fair? Is it unconscionable? And unconscionability is rooted in the disparity of bargaining power together with a contract term that unreasonably favors the party with superior bargaining power. Now, in general, when looking at the question of, is this contract unconscionable? Is it unfair? Should it not be enforced because of its fundamental unfairness? We look to see, was it the result of undue oppression? The fourth foundational principle has to do with the good faith requirement. We'll talk a lot about the good faith requirement. This regulates the performance of an Article 2 contract. So unconscionability regulates the formation of the contract. The good faith doctrine regulates the performance of the contract. Now, good faith means honesty in fact and the observance of reasonable commercial standards of fair dealing. The UCC imposes both a subjective and objective standard for determining a party's good faith. What do I mean by that? Well, it's subjective in that the person or the party must act honestly. They must be acting honestly. In their own head, they are acting in good faith. Moreover, it is objective in the sense that we are going to look at what are the standards of fair dealing. How would a reasonable person interpret good faith performance? And so we're going to rely on good faith performance as a means of regulating contract performance. Finally, Principle 5, the UCC favors practicality over formalism, and this somewhat reflects the first foundational principle. The UCC discards overly formalistic common law doctrines. The UCC believes that substance is more important than form. You may remember from your introductory business law course things like the mirror image rule, which says that an acceptance must exactly mirror an offer in order for an enforceable contract to exist. Well, the UCC does away with that, and they allowed for an acceptance that may not exactly mirror the offer that was given. However, it indicates a willingness to be bound, a willingness to be committed to the contract. The UCC wants the parties to be in a contract. And so in a situation where there's a question of does a contract exist or not, the UCC will usually be interpreted as to say there is a contract, and then we move to the question of was that contract breached or not. The UCC wants the parties to complete their contract, their agreement, and will not invalidate a contract simply based on any overly formalistic rules that exist in the common law. In construing a sales contract, what you should do when confronting a UCC problem is to respect the party's reasonable expectations. So in conclusion, what did we learn? The Uniform Commercial Code has 5 foundational principles. The first, Article 2, is tied to its commercial setting, meaning it is meant to reflect conduct that existed prior to its formulation. We know that merchants are held to a higher standard under the UCC. The unconscionability doctrine applies to the formation stage of an Article 2 contract. The good faith requirement regulates the performance of an Article 2 contract. And the UCC favors practicality over formalism. I hope that it helps you a bit to understand how it is that courts interpret the the UCC. If you have any questions, please let me know. Thank you.